He was halfway out of his chair. One hand on the armrest, one foot already pointed toward the wings, and his face still locked in that performance he always carried, the grin that said, "I own every room I walk into **. But something had landed. Something Stephen Colbert had said in a voice no louder than a man reading the weather. And the smile did not fall. It froze, like ice cracking across the surface of a lake that had been still for a long time. The audience went quiet, not the polite quiet of people waiting to laugh, the other kind. The kind that happens when a room full of strangers suddenly realizes they are all watching the same thing happen. 12 seconds passed. Colbert did not move. He did not fill the silence. He sat with his hands folded on the desk, the way a man sits when he has said everything he needed to say and has no interest in helping the other person off the hook. Trump's hand stayed on the armrest. His foot stayed pointed toward the exit, but he did not leave. And in those 12 seconds, something shifted in the air that he could not take back. But to understand how he ended up frozen in that chair, we have to go back to the moment he walked in thinking he had already won. The call came 3 hours before the show. Barack Obama was in his office in Washington when his phone lit up with a name he had not seen on his screen in years. Stephen Colbert. He picked up. "I've got him tomorrow night," Colbert said. "The interview. He's been calling everyone he knows trying to get out of it, but he's locked in the contract. He can't back out without paying a penalty, and that's the one thing he hates more than looking weak." Obama leaned back in his chair. "And you're worried because—" "I'm not worried, I'm preparing. He walks into that studio thinking he's going to rattle me the way he rattled everyone else. He'll try to control the room. He'll try to make it about him. He'll try to make me look like the punchline." "And you'll let him—" Colbert was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had that quality it always got when he was working something out, a quality that sounded almost like rest, but underneath it ran a current of steel. "No, I'm going to let him do exactly what he wants to do. I'm going to let him talk. And then I'm going to say one thing that he will not be able to walk away from without admitting that everything he just said was a performance. And he can't do that, not on television, not in front of an audience that's paid to watch him be the most powerful man in the room." Obama smiled. He had seen this before, he had lived this before. "Just remember, he's only dangerous when you give him something to push against. The second you stop pushing, he has nothing." "I know," Colbert said, "I know." The call ended. Obama put his phone down on the desk and looked out the window at the city that had changed so much since he had last held the weight of that office. He thought about what was about to happen in that studio, and he hoped, quietly without anyone to hear it, that Colbert knew what he was walking into. The green room at the Ed Sullivan Theatre had been redesigned since the last time Trump had sat in it. New carpet, new furniture, a mirror that reflected everything a little sharper than it used to. Trump stood in front of it adjusting his tie, and Ivanka stood behind him holding a tablet with the latest poll, numbers that someone had probably told her would make him feel better. "They love you in this demographic," she said. 62% among suburban women, up 3 points from last month. Trump nodded, but he was not listening. His eyes were on his own reflection, and something in that reflection was not quite right. He could feel it, the way you feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. "He'll try to make you look foolish," Ivanka said. "The way he did with Letterman, but you handled that, you were gracious, you were funny, you made him look like the one who was out of his league." "This isn't Letterman," Trump said. He turned away from the mirror. "Colbert's different, he's not trying to be liked, he's trying to be right, and the worst thing about him is he usually is." Ivanka did not know what to say to that. She had never heard her father admit that anyone was usually right about anything. A knock on the door, a production assistant with a headset. "Mr. President, we're ready for you in 5. Trump straightened his shoulders. He reached up and adjusted his collar one more time, and when he walked out of that room, he was carrying himself the way he always did in the final moments before a battle, like a man who had never lost and did not intend to start. Colbert was already seated when the audience erupted. The cheers came like a wave, and he let them roll through the studio for the exact amount of time it took to feel genuine without becoming a performance. He stood. He shook the hand that the camera want. To see him shake, he made the small talk that the format required. And then he sat back down, and the lights went down, and for 90 seconds the studio existed in that strange suspended space between the warm-up energy and the actual start of something. Colbert looked at the desk in front of him. There was a glass of water there, half full, and a folded piece of paper with 3 words written on it in his own handwriting. He had written them that morning during a walk through the park near his apartment, and he had not looked at them since. Let him talk. That was the whole plan. 3 words. The kind of instruction that sounds simple until you are sitting across from a man who has spent 50 years making sure no one ever gets to finish a sentence without his permission. The stage manager's voice came through the monitor, 30 seconds to air. Colbert took a breath, he let it out slowly, he folded his hands. The music played, the lights came up, and Donald Trump walked into the studio like a man who believed in his bones that he was the most important person who had ever stood in that spot. The first 7 minutes were a masterclass in controlled aggression. Trump came out firing. He attacked the economy, he attacked the media. He attacked the idea that anyone in that room, anyone watching at home, had a right to question the decisions he had made. He used the word tremendous 3 times in the first 2 minutes. He made eye contact with the camera like it was a rival he was daring to step forward. Colbert listened. He nodded in the places where nodding made sense. He laughed at the jokes that were actually funny, and he did not laugh at the ones that were not, which was a small thing but a noticed thing, and Trump noticed. "You're quiet tonight," Trump said, leaning forward with that grin that had been weaponized on debate stages and in boardrooms and in the hallways of airports for decades. "I expected more pushback. Is this what it's come to? You just let me talk." "I'm listening," Colbert said. "That's what you're supposed to do in an interview. The guest talks, the host listens, it's almost like a conversation." The audience laughed and something flickered across Trump's face, a flash of recognition that this man was not going to be easy. But he pushed through it. He always pushed through it. "Let me tell you something about conversations," Trump said, and he leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who had never been told no in a room that mattered. "Conversations are about power. Whoever talks the most has the power. Whoever asks the questions is the one who's scared of the answers. And right now you're asking all the questions, which means you're scared of what I'm going to say." Colbert tilted his head slightly. "You think I'm scared?" "I think you're trying to figure out how to get me to say something you can use against me. That's what you people do. You sit there with your little notes and your little questions, and you think you're going to trap me into saying something that will end up on a t-shirt somewhere." He smiled. "But here's the thing, I've been trapped by better people than you, and I'm still here, and they're not." The audience went quiet for a moment, not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that happens when someone says something that lands harder than they expected it to. Colbert let the silence sit there for 4 seconds, just long enough for the room to feel the weight of what had just been said. And then he said something that changed everything. "You've been trapped by better people," he repeated. His voice was still calm, still even. "And you're still here, that's true, but you're here because you never stop moving. The second you stop moving, you have to sit with what you've said, and I don't think you do that very often, do you?" The question hung in the air. Trump opened his mouth to answer, and for the first time in the interview he could not find the next line. The silence in the studio had a texture to it. It was the hum of the lights, barely audible, and the faint creak of Trump's chair as he shifted his weight, and somewhere in the back of the room, the soft exhale of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Trump's eyes moved across the desk in front of him. There was the glass of water again, half full, the surface still, catching the light. He looked at it like it was a map to somewhere he did not want to go. And then he did something that no one in that room expected. He laughed. Not the performance laugh, not the controlled chuckle he used when he wanted the audience to feel like they were in on the joke. This was different. It was harder. It came from somewhere deeper, and when it finished, his face went flat. "You know what your problem is," he said. "You think I'm running from something. You think if I just stop moving, there's this thing I can't face. But here's what you don't understand. I've looked at everything. I've looked at all of it, and I'm still standing. So whatever you think is back there waiting for me, it's not as scary as you think it is." Colbert nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. That was it, just okay. And the room could feel that okay land like a door closing softly, the kind of door that says I'm not going to argue with you about the inside of your own house. Trump stared at him for a moment, then he leaned forward. "You're condescending," he said. "You know that, you think you're above this, you think you're better than the game, but you're sitting in the same chair I am, you're getting the same ratings I am. And in about 20 minutes we're both going to walk out of here and nothing will have changed. You'll still be a late-night host. I'll still be the most powerful man in the world, and you'll still be pretending that any of this matters. Colbert folded his hands. He did not blink. It matters to the people watching, he said quietly. That's why we're here. And that was when Trump decided to leave. The movement was sudden. One moment he was in the chair. The next he was rising, one hand on the armrest, his body already pivoting toward the wings of the stage. He did not say goodbye. He did not give a signal. He simply decided that this conversation was over, and he was going to walk out of it the way he had walked out of every conversation that had ever started to make him feel like he was not the most important person in the room. The audience started to murmur. This was not supposed to happen. This was a late-night show. People did not walk off late-night shows, not live, not in front of an audience that was paying to watch them sit there and perform. Colbert watched him stand. He watched the hand grip the armrest. He watched the foot turn toward the exit. And he said nothing. The stage manager's voice crackled through the monitor. What do we do? Do we cut? Colbert did not answer. He sat perfectly still, and he watched Trump standing there in the lights, half in and half out of the moment, his body caught between the exit and something he could not see yet. 9 seconds passed. Trump did not move toward the wings. 12 seconds. The audience had gone completely quiet. This was the kind of silence that builds communities, the kind of collective held breath that happens when a room full of strangers understands they are all watching the exact same thing, and none of them want to miss what comes next. Colbert could feel it. He could feel the weight of that silence, and he understood that this was the moment. Not the big one, not the mirror moment, but the one that came just before it, the moment when the room needed to hear something true. "Mr. President," he said. His voice was not loud. It was not demanding. It was the voice of a man calling someone back from a doorway, the way you might call someone back from a ledge, except no one was on a ledge and no one was falling, and the only thing that was about to happen was an admission of something that neither of them had said out loud yet. Trump stopped. He did not turn around, but he stopped. Colbert picked up the glass of water from his desk. He took a sip. He set it down. He could have said anything in that moment. He could have made a joke. He could have appealed to the cameras or the audience or the contract that said Trump was not allowed to leave. He did none of those things. "The thing about running," he said, "is that you can only do it for so long before you realize you're running in a circle. And the circle gets smaller every time. And eventually you end up back where you started, except now you're tired, and everyone's watching, and you can't figure out why you're still standing in the same spot." Trump's hand was still on the armrest. "But here's the thing," Colbert said. "You're not running from the thing you think you're running from. You're running from the moment when someone looks at you and sees the same thing you see when you're alone at 3 in the morning and the television is off and the phone is silent. And that moment isn't as bad as you think it is, because that's the moment when you're just a person. And being just a person is not the worst thing that can happen to you. It's actually kind of where you start." Trump turned around. His face was not angry. That was the strange part. His face was something else, something that did not have a name, something that looked like recognition and exhaustion and the beginning of something that might have been understanding if he had let it. He stood there for a moment. The studio lights caught the edges of his hair in a way that made him look older than the photographs, and his hands were at his sides now, and he was not smiling. Then he walked back to his chair. He sat down. The audience stayed quiet for a long moment, and in that moment something shifted that could not be shifted back. Colbert let the silence run for 9 seconds. He had learned to count them over the years. Each one was a small gift you gave to the room, a way of saying I see what just happened, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. When he spoke again, his voice was still quiet, still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something that had not been there in the first 20 minutes of the interview. "You know what I noticed," he said. "When you stood up, for a second I thought you were going to make it. You know, I thought you were actually going to walk out. And I was going to sit here and watch you go, and I wasn't going to stop you, because that's not my job. My job is to ask the questions. Your job is to decide whether you want to answer them." Trump was watching him now, not performing, not posturing, just watching. "But you came back," Colbert said. "And I think I know why. Not because of the contract, not because of the ratings, not because of what anyone in this room thinks of you. You came back because somewhere in the last 30 seconds, you remembered something that you already knew and have been trying to forget for a long time." What? Trump said. His voice was not defensive, it was tired. Colbert leaned forward slightly. He folded his hands on the desk, and he held the mirror up. You already said it, he said. About an hour ago, you said conversations are about power. The person who talks the most has the power, and I think that's what you believe, I think that's what you've always believed. But here's what I noticed in the last 30 seconds. When you stood up and walked toward that door, you weren't talking, you were moving. And the second you stopped moving and started talking again, the power came back. Except this time you weren't talking to me. You were talking to yourself, and that's the part you've never let anyone see. The studio was very quiet now. The hum of the lights felt closer than it had before, and somewhere in the back of the room, someone coughed softly, and the sound was enough to make you aware of how still everyone was. Trump did not say anything. He looked down at his hands, he looked at the glass of water on the desk in front of him, he looked at Colbert. And then he laughed, not the performance, not the controlled chuckle. Just a quiet laugh that sounded like it had been sitting somewhere inside him for a long time, waiting for a door to open. You think you've got me figured out, he said, but there was no edge to it. It was more like a tired acknowledgement. The kind of sound a man makes when he has been found out and does not have the energy to pretend otherwise. I don't have you figured out, Colbert said. I'm just paying attention. That's all I've ever done. I watch, I listen. And then I try to say something that's true, not clever, not funny, just true. And sometimes the truth is that a man who walks away from a conversation isn't running from the other person. He's running from himself. And the only way to stop running is to sit down and look at what's been chasing you the whole time. Trump was quiet for a moment. The lights caught the lines in his face, and for a second he looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and was only just now realizing how heavy it was. And then he spoke. I've said a lot of things, he said. In this room, in other rooms, on camera, off camera, some of them I meant, some of them I didn't, and I know what you're doing. You're trying to get me to say something that proves I was wrong about all of it, but I'm not going to do that. Because if I do, then everything I've built falls apart, and I'm not ready for that. Colbert nodded. I'm not asking you to do that. You're not. No, I'm asking you to understand that the thing you're protecting isn't the thing that matters. The thing that matters is what happens when you stop protecting it. And it's not as bad as you think, it's just quieter than you're used to. And a little lonelier, and a little more honest. And that's not a bad place to be. It's actually kind of where the real stuff is. Trump looked at him. The studio lights made his eyes look darker than they were in the photographs, and there was something in them now that had not been there when he walked in. An exhaustion that was not physical, something deeper, something that had been there for a long time and had only now found a crack to show itself through. You really believe that, he said. It was not a question. I really do, Colbert said. The second silence came 16 minutes later, and it was different from the first. The first had been a room holding its breath. This one was a man holding his tongue. Trump had been talking for the last few minutes. Really talking, not performing, not posturing, just talking the way a man talks when he has finally decided to stop protecting something. And the words had a quality to them that the audience had not heard before. They were slower, they were more careful. They sounded like they were being chosen instead of thrown. Colbert listened. He did not interrupt. He did not ask follow-up questions. He sat in the chair and he let the words come, and he understood that this was the part of the story that most people missed because they left too early, the part where the noise stopped and something real started to take its place. The hum of the studio lights was different in this silence. It was closer to the sound of a heartbeat than a machine, and the air in the room felt heavier, and the faces in the audience had gone soft in a way that faces only go soft when they are watching someone they have never seen before. Trump was talking about his father now, not the political version, the real one. The man who had expectations and no patience and a way of making a child feel like they were never quite enough. The man who had died years ago but was still standing in the room, still watching, still judging every decision from a place that could not be reached or reasoned with. Colbert did not say anything. He let the story tell itself. And when Trump finally stopped talking, the silence that followed lasted for 11 seconds. It was the kind of silence that builds communities, the kind that happens when a room full of strangers realizes they have all been carrying the same weight and have just found out they are not alone. Colbert picked up his water glass, he took a sip, he set it down. And then he said the thing that had been waiting underneath everything that had come before. I think I understand now, he said, why you do all of this. Trump looked at him, his face was open in a way it had not been before, vulnerable, tired, human. Why, he asked. Colbert leaned back in his chair, he folded his hands, and he held the mirror up one more time. Because it's easier to be a performance than a person, because when you're performing the rules are simple, you say the things that work, you avoid the things that don't. You make sure everyone is watching and no one is seeing, it's clean, it's efficient, it's safe. But it's also lonely in a way that most people don't talk about. Because the person you're performing for is a version of you that you made up, and you can never actually reach them. You can only get close enough to trick yourself into thinking you're close. Trump was very still. The studio lights caught the edge of his jaw, and there was something in his eyes that looked like recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when you see yourself in a mirror you did not know was there. And the thing is, Colbert continued, you've been so good at the performance for so long that you forgot there's a difference. You forgot that underneath all of it there's just a person who wants to be seen, not the performance, not the power, just the person. And that's the thing that's been missing. That's the thing you've been running from, and that's the thing that's been waiting for you this whole time. The studio was quiet. The hum of the lights felt like it was coming from very far away, and the air in the room had a quality to it that felt almost sacred, the kind of quality that happens when something true is being said and everyone knows it. Trump looked down at his hands. He looked at the desk in front of him. He looked at the glass of water that had been sitting there the whole time, half full, the surface still, catching the light. And then he looked up at Colbert. And he nodded. Not the performance nod, not the political nod, just a small, quiet nod that said, I hear you, and that was enough. The interview ended differently than it had started. The cameras were still running. The audience was still watching. But something had changed in the room, and everyone could feel it, the same way you feel a storm passing, the way you feel the air shift after something heavy has been set down. Trump stood up from his chair. He straightened his jacket, he looked at Colbert. Thank you, he said. The words were quiet. They did not sound like something he said often. Colbert stood up too. Thank you for coming back. Trump smiled. It was not the performance smile. It did not reach his eyes, but it was real in a way that the other one had never been. The smile of a man who has just understood something about himself that he had been avoiding for a long time. I almost didn't, he said. I know, Colbert said, but you did, that's what matters. Trump looked at him for a moment longer. And then he turned and walked toward the wings of the stage, and the audience watched him go, and no one cheered, and no one clapped, and the room was filled with something that was not quite silence and not quite sound, something in between, something that felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else. Colbert watched him go. The stage manager's voice came through the monitor, we're clear. Colbert sat back down. In his chair, he picked up the glass of water and finished it. He set it back on the desk. The audience was still there, they had not left. They were waiting for something, and Colbert understood what it was. He stood up, he walked to the edge of the stage. He looked out at the sea of faces. Thank you for staying, he said. I know it wasn't what you expected, I know you came here thinking you were going to watch a fight, and for a while that's what you got, but then something else happened, something quieter, something that didn't have a winner or a loser, just two people talking, really talking. And I think that's the part that matters. I think that's why you're still here. The audience was very quiet. The thing I've learned, over the years, is that the loudest voices are usually the ones that are most afraid of silence. And the most powerful performances are usually the ones that are most afraid of being seen. And the people who run the fastest are usually the ones who are most afraid of what happens if they stop. He paused, the studio lights were warm on his face, and the hum of them was a kind of white noise that made the silence feel closer. But sometimes someone stops, and sometimes they turn around, and sometimes they sit back down and look at the thing they've been running from and they realize it wasn't as scary as they thought, and that's not a weakness, that's actually where the strength is, that's where the real stuff starts. And that's what I hope you take with you tonight, not who won, not who lost, just the idea that it's possible to stop, it's possible to look. It's possible to see yourself clearly even if what you see isn't perfect, because that's where the work starts, and that's where the growth happens, and that's where you find out who you actually are. The audience was quiet, some of them were crying, most of them were just sitting there very still holding something they could not name. Colbert looked at them for a moment longer, and then he nodded. Good night, he said. He walked off the stage. Obama was awake when the interview aired. He watched it in his office alone with the sound turned low. He watched Trump walk in performing. He watched him try to leave. He watched him come back. He watched the mirror get held up. He watched the silence at the end. And when it was over, he sat in his chair for a long time, looking at the dark screen, thinking about what had happened in that room. He picked up his phone. He called Colbert. "You did it," he said. Colbert's voice came through the phone, tired but clear. "I just said what was true, that's all I did." "That's all you ever have to do," Obama said. "And that's what makes it hard, because the truth doesn't perform, it doesn't posture. It just sits there, quiet and still, waiting for someone to be brave enough to look at it. And most people aren't. Most people run. They take the easy exit. They protect the performance. They keep moving so they never have to stop and see what's actually there." "But he stopped," Colbert said. "He actually stopped." "Yeah," Obama said, "he did, and that's the part that matters. That's the part most people miss because they leave too early. They think the story is about who's winning and who's losing. But the real story is about the moment when someone decides to stop performing and start being honest. And that's the moment when everything changes, not for the audience, for them." Colbert was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "It was strange," he said, "in that moment when he stood up and started walking away. For a second I thought about letting him go. I thought about just sitting there and watching him leave, and part of me wanted to because I knew what would happen. I knew he'd walk out and the next day he'd be on every channel saying I tried to trap him and he wouldn't play along. And the story would be about him being strong and me being weak. And it would be a performance. A good one. And everyone would believe it. But you didn't let him go." "No, I let him decide. I sat there and I let him decide. And when he came back, it wasn't because I made him. It was because he chose to, and that made all the difference." Obama nodded. He understood. He had lived this before. He had been in rooms where the other person expected him to perform, to fight, to give them something to push against. And he had learned over the years that the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. You sit, you wait, you let them come to you, and when they do, you meet them where they are. "That's the lesson," he said. "That's always been the lesson. The person who stays still wins, not because they outsmart the other person, not because they say the clever thing, but because they are willing to wait. And patience is the hardest thing to maintain when everyone is watching and expecting you to do something. But that's also why it works. Because most people can't do it. Most people have to fill the silence, they have to perform, they have to keep moving. And when you don't, when you just sit there and wait, it exposes something, not something bad, something true. And the truth is the only thing that can't be performed." Colbert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For reminding me why I do this. For reminding me that it's not about the laughs. It's not about the ratings. It's about the moment when someone decides to stop running and look at themselves honestly. And if you can be there for that, if you can create the space for it to happen, then you've done something that matters. Even if no one else understands what just happened." Obama smiled. He put his feet up on his desk. He looked out the window at the city that was still awake, still moving, still running. "Yeah," he said, "that's the thing that matters most. The quiet moment when someone decides to be honest. And if you can be there, if you can hold the mirror up without breaking it, then you've done something that no amount of power or performance can ever give you. You've given someone the chance to see themselves, really see themselves, and that's the beginning of everything." The line went quiet. Two men in separate rooms thinking about the same thing, the same silence, the same moment, the same understanding that the most powerful thing in the world is not the loudest voice or the biggest performance. It is the quiet truth that waits underneath all of it, patient and still, until someone is brave enough to look. Obama put the phone down. He sat there in his office in the quiet, and he thought about the man who had walked out of that studio and the man who had sat there and let him decide. And he thought about the silence that follows when someone stops running. And he thought about how that silence is where everything important begins.